Today, it's all about a boost battle. The Ford gets boost, the Chevy gets boost, the Dodge gets, well, you guessed it, boost. Okay guys, we all know the Junkyard LS responds very well to boost. But what about the other guys? This video is part one of a three-part series on our Junkyard boost battle. We're going to compare a 4.6 liter 2-valve Ford to a 5.3 liter LM7 to a 5.7 liter Gen 3 Hemi. Okay guys, here's the program. This is part one of a three-part series. We're comparing the 4.6 2-valve Ford to the 5.3 liter LM7 to the 5.7 liter Gen 3 Hemi. So now, why the different displacements? Well, that's easy. Ford, Chevy, and Dodge don't make a common displacement that I can use for all of them. And this really wasn't a shootout per se. In fact, it was just the opposite. What we're trying to show here is not which one of those is better. I mean, that 2-valve Ford definitely is handcuffed. We're trying to show you that no matter what you get, Ford, Chevy, Dodge, import, I don't care if you're a tractor guy. If you go get something from the junkyard and add boost, it's gonna be better. I mean, that's a win-win no matter what you choose. But this is part one. We're gonna cover the 4.6 2-valve Ford. And the reason we're having three parts is I can't cover all of the information on all three motors in one video. I mean, in some of these tests, I ran it NA, I ran it turbocharged, I ran it at different boost levels, I ran it intercooled and non-intercooled, and at different timing levels. So there's a lot of stuff to cover. This is part one. Check it out. I'm sure as soon as I mentioned 4.6 2-valve Ford that I lost the LS guys and probably lost the Hemi guys. You guys might want to stick around and find out how well this motor does under boost. Because like every motor, it responds well. Now, Ford started building that 4.6 2-valve back in 1991. And they built it all the way up to 2004, so it had a long life. And they used it in a lot of different applications. Passenger cars, performance stuff like the Mustang, and trucks. There's a lot of them out there. They're easy to find and they're plentiful. The problem is, as Ford saw, when they introduced the overhead cam version, the aftermarket really didn't follow suit. I mean, only one company decided to make a cylinder head for it. That's the guys from TFS. Thanks for stepping up, guys, because that's an awesome cylinder head. There are cams for it, but you got to replace two, which is not as bad as the 4-valve motor. And so the aftermarket support was not as great, and that motor just never caught on the way it did with the previous 5-liter Ford. But that doesn't mean you can't make good power with it. All you have to do is get one from the junkyard, or if you already have one, and add some boost. Obviously, since we were getting our motor from the junkyard, we didn't have to do too many things to our test motor. Now, the test motor was a 1999 4.6 liter PI 2-valve. It came from a 99 Mustang, although they use that same motor in trucks and other passenger cars too. But ours actually came from a Mustang and had about 109,000 miles is what the odometer said, so maybe you can go by that. We brought the motor back and ran it up on the dyno, and unfortunately, because this test was run way back in 2007, there's no video of the engine running. I didn't even take video back then because I was doing the story for Hot Rod, and we were just taking pictures of it. So I got photos, but if you want, in the background, I can go wah and make some cool noises. But other than that, there's no videos of the motor running. So we ran the motor up on the dyno, and I configured it with long tube headers, a fast XFI management system, and basically had an open throttle body and no accessories because normally we run an electric water pump. So we ran the motor naturally aspirated. So let's take a look and see what those results are when we ran it NA, and then we'll install our CHEVY turbo kit. Okay, here's the power output of our 4.6 liter 2-valve Mustang engine. And it was equipped with, in this configuration, with shorty headers from Ford Racing, the fast XFI management system. We had 36-pound injectors in this. And here's the peak power at 288 horsepower at 4,900 RPM. Obviously, Ford never designed this thing to, despite the fact that it's an overhead cam motor, which was a little disappointing for a lot of guys, including myself, when this thing came out. It's an overhead cam motor, but it was not designed to rev. I mean, it's making peak power at 4,900 RPM. It's much more like the 5-liter Mustang, and maybe Ford did that on purpose because they didn't want to deviate too much from what was really working well. I mean, the 5-liter Ford Mustang obviously reinvigorated Ford and their performance machine, and it was kind of the start of a huge industry, so maybe they didn't want to deviate too much from that. But making peak power at 4,900 RPM, and it had 335 foot-pounds of torque out at 4,100 RPM. Now this was with a set of shorty headers, but if we take a look, we can see, let's take a look at see what happened when we ran long tube headers. Not that it makes any difference because we're going to take all that stuff off when we run the turbo anyway, but it's just interesting because we were there and we tested it. So that's a set of long tube Cook's headers, 1 3/4 for a Fox or for a 4.6 liter 2-valve Mustang application. And the headers picked up quite a bit, you know, everywhere, you know, nice little gain, especially with a stock cam. These things make even more if the motor is, you know, has more modifications. But it picked up, you know, between 10 and 12 foot-pounds of torque, and it jumped the power up from 288 up to 296 or 297. So it's just under 300 horsepower with the long tube headers. This is our naturally aspirated power output on the 4.6 2-valve. Now let's take a look and see what happened after we added boost. After running the motor naturally aspirated, it made a little under 300 horsepower. And guys might be wondering, well, it's only rated at 260, but the power output that it makes on this engine dyno when run under optimized conditions, it had an optimized tune, it had no accessories, it had no air intake, it had long tube headers. So all of that stuff allows it to make more power than it's actually rated at. And the factory motors would do that if they ran it in the configuration that we run on this dyno. So after running at NA, it was time to put the turbo stuff on. And we used instead of using the factory exhaust manifolds, we actually used shorty headers because we had them, and they end at the same spot that the factory exhaust manifold does because they're designed for that application. So we built a custom Y pipe. When I say we, I mean my good pal Ernie Mina, who was working at West Tech at the time. Shout out to Ernie and the boys up there. Miss you guys. So Ernie built this Y pipe, and all it is a connection, a Y pipe, a dedicated piece that connects together the two exhaust manifolds, run them to a common tube, and then that allows us to mount the turbo there. So we mounted one of these 76mm CX Racing turbos and an air-to-water intercooler, but first we ran it non-intercooled, then we ran it with an intercooler, and we juggled the boost around and juggled the timing around a little bit, but we'll go over all that in the results. Okay, here we have our turbocharged 4.6 liter 2-valve. Unfortunately, I can't show you, I can't overlay the graph of the naturally aspirated run because this was right about the time that West Tech was changing the software on their dyno stuff, and the older stuff does not cooperate, does not communicate with the new stuff. So that motor made under 300 horsepower and like 340 foot-pounds of torque. Basically, it's this same shape of this curve. It's just lower, which is what we'll see later on in all of these tests on the 5.3 LS and on the 5.7 Hemi. Is the boosted output just mirrors the NA output? It's just higher everywhere. So this is actually run in non-intercooled trim, and it made 394 horsepower. So we're talking, it picked up like 100 horsepower over stock. This was at about 6 pounds of boost, non-intercooled, and it also had very low timing because it was intercooled. We ran this actually on pump gas, and it only had about 17 degrees of timing. So here's what happened once we added some timing to this thing. So we put good gas in it and cranked the timing up to about 22 degrees from 17. And you can see it's same boost level, same wastegate setting, picked up a ton of power, 431 horsepower, and a bunch of torque everywhere, 464 foot-pounds of torque. So things were working well with the non-intercooler. Then we put an intercooler on it, and we turned the boost up even more. And we got a big jump, relatively speaking. I know some of the LS guys and the Hemi guys probably will laugh at this, but we got a big jump in power all the way up to right at 500 horsepower. And we made 533 foot-pounds of torque. So again, this thing was doing under boost exactly what it did as a naturally aspirated motor. It was very torquey. It made more torque than it made horsepower. It was making peak horsepower at about the same point and peak torque at about the same point because we had a nice consistent boost curve. That 76mm turbo was very responsive on this combination as a single, and it was matched pretty well for this kind of power output because let's face it, it's 500 horsepower. But over, 533 foot-pounds of torque, you can definitely spin the tires with that kind of torque. This would have no problem doing this, and it would be fun in a Mustang. To be even better, obviously, if you had cams in it, maybe some cylinder heads, and more boost, obviously. But that's another test for another day. This is just all stock, just boost from the junkyard, 500 horsepower, 530 foot-pounds of torque. let's get to our conclusion. Okay guys, so what did we learn in our testing on the 4.6 liter 2 valve? And more importantly, how is it going to compare later on to the LS and to that 5.7 Hemi? After all, they both have more displacement and a few years of extra technology built into them. So on this 4.6 2 valve, it just goes to show you. We went to the junkyard, picked up a motor, and put it up on the dyno just to make sure that it ran, first of all, because we wanted to make sure we had a healthy customer. And as it turned out, it did. And it did very well. It made a little under 300 horsepower naturally aspirated. And then we added our homemade CHEVY turbo kit. Now you can make this with stock exhaust manifolds if you want, but we happen to use a set of those shorty headers. We made the Y pipe. My good buddy Ernie whipped that up for us, and we were able to install that eBay turbo. Now since we weren't looking for a ton of power, that 76 millimeter turbo was sized about right for what we were trying to do. It had good response and offered plenty of power. And it just goes to show you, you can take a bone stock motor, and now you can run it with all the accessories and do all that stuff. Take a bone stock motor, add boost to it, and good things happen. Now, 500 horsepower in turbocharged form may not seem like a lot, especially in the days of, now that we're doing 1,000 horsepower LS stuff, but a 500 horsepower Mustang is still pretty sporty, or anything that you happen to have that motor in. It'll still get around pretty good. It'll spin the tires all day long with, for a lot of us, that's all that we want anyway, right? So, turbo, good. Junkyard, good. The combination, even better. The 4.6 2 valve motor worked great, and it just goes to show you anything that you get, even kind of a low performance deal, relatively speaking, this 2 valve motor, you put boost on it, it works well. All the stuff going to work the same way. You'll get a small block Chevy, a small block Ford, whatever you get, add boost to it. This 2 valve worked good. The next video coming up, we're going to show you what happens when we run the 5.3, and we'll follow that up with the Hemi. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. Come on, support us. Do what you got to do. I'm doing my part. You guys got to do your part. Thanks for watching.